Hello everybody, thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Lukas Paltram. I am Creative Director at Dalton Mark, and we're a typeface design studio. Dalton Mark is based actually in London. I'm from Vienna. I also work in Vienna, and we're an international team. We have like around 25 nationalities within our studio. And we're specialized in custom type design. So over the years, Dalton Mark's been going for around 30 years. Over the years, we worked with a lot of really interesting clients, and basically what we do is we kind of do that. We give specialized typographic expression to different brands or products. This could be triggered by the kind of idea to create a certain brand expression that is unique, that you cannot just kind of go and buy off the shelf. This could be from the challenges of functionality. For example, we created fonts for the Kindle reader, for the Paperwhite reader. So if you read a book on your ebook, the typeface that you read it in would be the one that we designed specifically for that device and specifically for the challenges of the e-ink device, which wasn't possible to be resolved otherwise. A lot of the projects are brand related. Some are like in sports and fashion, and we do a lot of work with sort of technology brands as well. There's also kind of different sorts of clients, but really the interesting thing and the inspiring thing about the work in typography is that it's extremely varied, and you might think that okay, A to Z is always the same. Well, it's not. There's many different forms and shapes, and also it was interesting to understand also of course earlier the CreativeMornings community that really exists all over the world. This is also something that we're specializing in, that we create also typographic systems that are truly global. So we don't only deal with the Latin alphabet, but we deal with all sorts of other writing systems and script systems. And some of our clients have commissioned large projects that really span the entire globe. And that is really interesting, and that's really inspiring. Today, the topic is Muse. And I thought about what I could speak about, and I want to speak about probably my favorite project that I've ever worked on, which was a project for the city of Vienna. Cities can be interesting because there's a lot of inspiration that we draw from them without probably realizing it. If you walk through the street, if you grow up in a certain place, you're exposed to a kind of a landscape that you take for granted, but it's actually something that is really forming your personality and your inspirations. My colleagues, I have a couple of colleagues that work out of Brazil. Some years ago, they designed the typeface for the Rio Olympics, which is like, wow, probably the biggest job you can have, working for the Olympics. And what I found really interesting, I didn't personally work on this project, but you can see that this project was directly inspired by the city of Rio de Janeiro, and you can just see it in the forms and in the shapes that is directly drawn to from a certain place. I was really happy that I got a similar opportunity. We got a similar opportunity to work on a project for the city of Vienna. So, how did we get there? The city of Vienna, around a couple of years ago, came up with a request for proposals to basically create a brand for the city government, so for the Stadtregierung. It invited basically a European-wide audience of agencies to participate in a pitch, and there was one group of agencies between Saffron, St. Stephen's, and Instant Design, which is a combination of 3 Viennese agencies. Saffron is also an international agency, and they together won the pitch to redefine or to actually create a brand for the city of Vienna. And they came to us as specialists in typography to design a typeface for the city. And of course, when I got the call, or when we sort of were invited to participate in this project, I was, extremely stoked, because, how often can you do that? Create the typeface for the city that you live in and for the city that you love. And so far, there wasn't really such a thing as a particular typeface that you would identify with Vienna. I mean, look at the logo. This is the logo that the city used up until this year, actually. And it's interesting. It's fun, I suppose. It has a certain sort of idea behind it. I guess speaks towards diversity and creativity, which are all great things. But I suppose the kind of expression that it has could also have some sort of different connotations. And really, it's not very confident, I suppose. So basically, we got a brief to design a new typeface for the city, and it should have only 3 weights. It should be basically for any kind of media, digital and printed media. It should work from small size to large size. It should be human in its character and have a strong character, and it should be typically Viennese. Okay, all right, can deal with that, I suppose. What's typically Viennese in typographic terms? Is that Viennese? Probably not. Feels pretty German. Is that Viennese? Looks perfect. Like every line is just perfect, and everything is just smooth, and it's just a little bit too clean. It's very Swiss. What's Austrian, or more specifically, what's actually Viennese? Cities can have a strong typographic language. Everybody knows this is London. Everybody knows this is New York. Everybody knows this is Berlin. Probably most people know here that this is Vienna. But if I would show this to somebody that's not from Vienna, maybe they wouldn't understand that. Vienna has got a lot of typographic inspiration going on. Of course, there is street signage. There is also other sorts of transport systems, for example, that need to communicate with you when you sort of navigate through the city. There's a lot of inspiration that you can draw from that. But there's more than that. There's also historic signages on stores, on buildings, on historic buildings that you can draw inspiration from. And, there is food. There are things to eat and to drink, and there's a culture around in Vienna that is really inspiring, that we can draw inspiration from it. And Vienna has a really, really strong tradition in creating interesting typography. And I suppose not everybody thinks about that when they walk through the cities. There's a certain, I suppose Vienna has got that certain mix of different cultures that it always had, that inspired people that are living here, inspired people that are working here and creating here. And we really wanted to tap into that sort of inspiration and get inspiration from various different places, and not necessarily only from the sort of the digital media that we engage ourselves with constantly. And there's high culture, There's Vienna is world renowned for its contributions to art and culture, and of course there's a lot of connotation from Vienna with the Jugendstil era and or Art Nouveau era, and the era of the turn of the century. And typographically, there's a lot going on there, which can be part of an inspiration. So basically what we did, and I didn't work on this alone, this was team effort, we tried to draw as much inspiration as we could from various different places from the city of Vienna, and tried to distill it down to a certain pool of concepts that we have discussed with the agencies, with the creative agencies that were on the project, and of course also with the client, so the city itself. We presented our sketches, and we presented our first design of different typographic concepts. And we narrowed it down. So there's some sketches from my team members that were working on this project. We had a couple of, so we're an international team, but we had actually 4 Austrian designers on the project, which is, great. But we also had a couple of international designers on the project, which is even better because, they give you a different perspective. And from the pool of those different sketches, we came up with around 9 different ideas. And how do we start? So we started to actually, how do you actually produce typeface? I mean, you need A to Z, but should you start with the A and do the B and C and D and A? Probably not. You need a kind of small character set that you start with. In the case of the city of Vienna, it was kind of easy because we didn't only design the typeface, but the typeface in itself should also create the basis for the new word mark that was used as a logo for the city. So it was kind of clear that we would start with the 2 words Stadt Wien and produce the characters, the individual characters to produce these words. And we came up with around 9 different concepts that all are inspired by different inspirations directly drawn from the city. And what you see here, what they share is a certain kind of weight. So when you talk in terms of weight, when you talk about this in typographic terms, it means like the color that it produces when you look at it. Is it light? Is it regular? Is it medium? Or is it bold? So that weight should be the same across all of them, and also the proportions are harmonious. So how tall is the X height in relationship to the cap height? Because you need to identify those parameters, otherwise you cannot compare the different typographic designs. But you can create quite a lot of a range of expression. And what you can see here is probably it spans from a rather sort of traditional or maybe a little bit more simple sans serif construction to something that is more expressive and more unique, has more contrast. So when we speak about contrast in typographic terms, it's the difference between thin and thick strokes. And of course you can see here this is a lot more decorative, I suppose, and a little bit more ornamental than the design up here. There were presentations, there were discussions, there was a lot of sort of creative back and forth going on. And what the city landed on is this option B. I'm going to break down how we came there. So this was our first approach to this design. And as it is hopefully a little bit obvious, is that the shape of the uppercase W, for example, is directly related to the shape of the shield of the city of Vienna. We wanted to create, with this concept, we wanted to create something that is actually modern and is current in terms of its proportions, its design. It should be used and it should be seen by everybody, like people like us, everybody that is in the room, everybody that lives in the city, that works in the city, that walks through the city. It's a modern design, it's a current design, but at the same time it's inspired by some of the classic design features that we draw, especially from the Jugendstil area, and some of the different kinds of inspiration that we can take, and directly also inspired by the shield itself. So as you can see here, for example, some of the shaping of the letters is directly related to the curves of the shield. Taking all of these pieces together, we came up with this concept. And in a way, it's something that you want to achieve in design, that there is a relationship of individual strokes or structures or modules that work in combination with each other, that maybe are not overly exaggerated. So I know that there's been a lot of discussion around this, and this came out and sort of lots of people hated it and some people liked it, and then some more people liked it, and now probably everybody's okay with it, or some people are okay with it, I don't know. It was interesting to see the conversation around it. Most people said, oh, those T's, how can you do a T like that? Yeah, there are historic, examples of T's like that, and when can you create a T like that if not here? If you can see directly that negative space of the shield that is reflected in the shape of the T. It works perfectly. Or that little diagonal outstroke that you can see here on that crossbar of the T, which is in the internal shape of the shield, it works. Maybe it's not totally obvious, but I think when the individual elements tie together, it creates a certain harmony within itself. The W, the slight kind of bowing of the curves, so you don't have straight diagonals, but you also take this slight curvature from the shield into the character shapes. A slight inclination of the E, of the crossbar of the E, so it looks a little bit more positive and smiling. That also goes back to some historic examples. There's a lot going on in there, although it's hopefully, not too strong. It's not as as expressive maybe as the previous logo, but it still has a lot going on. And I think it's important that it does, because you just what's the point of creating a new typographic system if it's not recognizable, if you cannot see it and you cannot not identify it with the actual brand, or in this case the city that stands behind it. So there's a lot going on in here, but for us it was clear that we also need to create a version of this typeface that doesn't only work for the logo, but that also works for text, because remember, this was designed to work in small size, large size, digital print. So a T like the one that we showed earlier is maybe a little bit too much. You wouldn't want to have like long form reading and be exposed to a T like this. Also, the proportions are a little bit different. So in the proportions, we created a text version of this, where some of the narrow shapes, like the uppercase S, are just a little bit wider, and some of the proportions, like the ascenders, so that's the sort of the stroke that reaches to the very top on the D, is just a little bit higher than the capital height. That helps with the legibility in smaller sizes. And we tested this concept from the beginning, also in text setting. And you only need a bunch of letters, you only need a certain kind of small set of characters to be able to actually test the typographic system. You don't need all of them. And we also tested it in the new brand environment. And so I have to say that when we worked on this project, this whole concept of the new city branding was still under development. So we used all the elements that we had available, because it was important that of course, they speak to each other and work together. The next step, what we did was we expanded the concept. So we created different weights. We go from a very, very, very thin or light weight to a very, very, very bold weight or black weight. So that allows us to interpolate anything that's in between. In type, you want to take shortcuts, because there's a lot to draw. There's a lot of individual characters in a typeface. And if you go between different weights and styles, this can add up, because you don't only have to draw the characters, but you also have to consider the spacing, so the white space between the characters. You have to consider the kerning, the white space between individual letter pairs. There's a work. If you don't think about it, you probably never considered it. But if you think about how to create a typeface, there's a lot of work involved. It takes a while. So we can take shortcuts whenever we can, and we want to work effectively and efficiently. So by drawing the extreme weights and narrowing it down, and again together with the different creative agencies and with the clients, we decided for the 3 exactly right weights. Because you don't want to deal with 12 different weights. It's only going to be complicated in the implementation when you need to distribute those weights to people to work with. So it needs to be 3 weights, but it needs to be the right weights. So we settled on those, regular bold and extra bold. The extra bold to create a certain punch and a certain expression that should be used primarily for larger sizes, and the regular and bold that could also be used for smaller sizes. And then we actually start to expand the character set and add more characters to it. Again, going back to the drawing board and doing sketches, and consider how the rest of the alphabet would look like. There's a lot of rounds of corrections. Type design is a very detail-oriented discipline, so there's a lot of point shifting in a very kind of small way, but they make a big effect, because it's the combination of the individual strokes that make the typographic texture. And if one character stands out, it breaks everything. Everything needs to be perfect. And that's what it looks like. It's I'm of course biased, because I think it's an interesting job. I think it's a typeface that has a recognizable expression to it, you know. As you can see here, you remember how the logo looked like, or the word mark looked like, and the W, and how that influences all of those other characters in the diagonals, and how the shaping of those diagonals works here on the K and the W, or in the V. And you remember those outstrokes on the T with the slight diagonal cut that can be replicated in some design features here. And it's that combination of individual elements that creates a typographic texture that is unique and that didn't exist before. The lowercase maybe are a little bit more unified in terms of proportions. The uppercase to go back to a more sort of humanistic design proportion where the width of the characters is varying. So for example, you have an E or an F or an L that's relatively narrow, and you have an H or an O or an N that is relatively wide. So even in uppercase setting, it allows for some variation in the proportions, which gives it a humanistic expression. And remember, in the briefing, it should be a typeface that is human and is not too mechanic. The lowercase characters probably a little bit more unified in their proportions and a little bit more simplified. But there are some elements of expression in there. Look at that J. So that J still works, although the T, you know, it needs a little bit of a sort of outstroke on the bottom. The J can still go without. So there are some elements in there that create an interesting expression. Numbers are always fun to draw, and in this case, I think they are quite unique. And of course, there's also punctuation, because otherwise we couldn't do smileys. And that's just the kind of the basic character set. We also included a couple of alternate shapes. Like here, you can see there's an alternate shape for the ampersand, so for the symbol that maybe isn't used so often, but if it fits, it fits. And also, of course, the city shield is part of the character set. And that can also be accessed via OpenType features for all typographic nerds here. OpenType. You know, it's the engine that runs the fonts. So basically, you can teach a font a lot to how to behave, and OpenType allows for things like stylistic alternates or ligatures. So if you type an F and another F, it's not two Fs joined together, but it's actually a new shape that is drawn specifically so the two Fs fit perfectly together. Or if you have a fraction where you have a 1 and a slash and a 2, then it fits together and it creates that shape, right? And you can do that also with symbols. So in this case, if I type Stadt Wien Wappen, what I get is this. So you can do those things with OpenType, which is quite nice. And makes the implementation easier. So we did those in 3 weights. And of course, a lot of testing again with the different layouts and in implementation that we had. And yeah, that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like in combination. There's also a German double S cap version in there. If you have followed any conversations around typography over the last 10 years or 5 years, the German double S is probably the one that most people spoke about, because either you love it or you hate it, and people are like, yes, we need it, or no, it's the worst thing ever. And I think it's okay. You know, I'm not a total advocate for it. I think it has sense. It makes sense in a passport. If you called whatever Hess or Hess, and you are called Hess with a double S or Hess with a sharp S, how can you make the difference if you don't have the double S in cap version in uppercase setting? So there's a place for it. Do you need it in Straßenbahnhaltestelle? Probably not. But you know, we have it. The last thing that was needed was also the name. And how can you name the typeface for the city of Vienna? Of course, it has to be called Wiener Melange. It's a mix of different elements, you know, get it? And you know, that's what it looks like. There's also the font production that goes into it. So you need to produce a font, which is basically a piece of software that needs to run on different systems. It comes in different versions, different formats, different file formats for web, for app, for desktop. And we also created a variable font for it. Again, for all the typographic nerds, that's something that maybe you're familiar with. So basically the whole idea is that one variable font can contain the information of multiple weights into one single file. You can save space, and you can create also some dynamic ranges between the static weights. And that's what we did as well, because we want to create something that is also future-proof, and that isn't only applicable now, but it's still going to be usable a couple of years down the line. And that's what it looks like. That's how it looks like implemented in the different applications. I think the agencies and the city have done a fantastic job of implementing it. The way that the city talks to the citizen now is, it's, in my opinion, it's fresh, it's clean, it's got a strong voice, it's got an expression, it's not over the top, it feels, current, and it's already out there. I can actually see it right here. So at the back of the Bushaltestelle, you're asked to go to vote because it's not wurscht. And I suppose the typeface kind of works with it. If you would type "was nicht wurscht" is in Univer or in a Helvetica or in a DIN, probably wouldn't be as authentic. So I'm quite happy with what we did. I hope you are as well, because you'll see a lot of it. And thank you very much.